Thank you for the introduction. My name is Heidi Lee, and I am a branch chief within the Office of Program and Regulatory Operations within the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, or OPQ. I'm very happy to be here to talk about application communications from a quality assessment perspective. But first, a little bit about pharmaceutical quality. A quality product of any kind means the expectations of the user is consistently met. And drugs are no different. With every dose, patients expect safe and effective medicine. And pharmaceutical quality is assuring every dose is safe and effective and free of contamination and defects, and what gives patients confidence in their next dose of medicine. Our Office of Pharmaceutical Quality assures that quality medicines are available for the American public, and communication plays a key role. So today, our learning objective is to understand ANDA assessment timeline, identify OPQ communication time points, and be able to describe the communication types. We'll also review best practices and frequently asked questions and answers. So let's get started with the ANDA assessment timeline and OPQ, or quality communication time points. Here you'll see the ANDA assessment timeline, starting from when an ANDA is first submitted all the way to the GDUFA goal date. Two important dates in the ANDA assessment timeline: the MCD, or mid-cycle date, which is the midpoint of the assessment cycle plus 30 days, and the GDUFA goal date, when you can expect an approval, tentative approval, or complete response action. Let's take a look at what goes on before the MCD, or mid-cycle date. Typically, when an ANDA is submitted, a filing decision is made within 30 to 60 days, which takes us to assessment phase 1. Our first quality communication time point will be in assessment phase 1 in the form of an IR, or information request letter, primarily to request additional information or clarification to continue with the assessment. It's during this first phase our assessment teams are assessing your application, issuing IR letters, assessing IR responses, and identifying any preliminary deficiencies to be issued via the Discipline Review Letter, or DRL for short. Which takes us to our next communication time point, the MCD, or mid-cycle date, which is when a discipline review letter is issued. Finally, in assessment phase 2, here the DR letter response is assessed and additional IRs could be issued. This is typically our last communication time point before we need to start wrapping up assessments, taking into consideration time for endorsements prior to taking an action by the GDUFA goal date. In summary, you essentially have two assessment phases, one before the mid-cycle date and one after. And you have your 3 time points where quality communications can occur. 1, during the first assessment phase with the first IR. 2, at the mid-cycle date with the discipline review letter. And 3, during the second assessment phase with any additional IRs. GDUFA 2 centered on improving communications during the assessment cycle. So with the assessment starting earlier, it allows for applicants to receive feedback earlier and have opportunities to resolve issues within the same assessment cycle. And this was possible with IR/DR letters, which we'll go into detail next. But before that, let's answer a challenge question. Challenge question number 1. Which of the following statements is not true? A. Quality information request letters can be issued anytime after an application is found acceptable for filing. B. Quality Discipline Review Letter is issued around the midpoint of the ANDA assessment cycle. C. Multiple IRs may be issued within the ANDA assessment cycle. Or D. The mid-cycle date is when the first IR letter is issued. The correct answer is D. The MCD is when the DR letter is issued, not the IR letter. Now that we are all familiar with the ANDA assessment timeline and know when quality communications can occur, let's take a closer look into the communication types. Information requests, or IR letters, are used to request clarification or additional information to continue with the assessment, or will be helpful to allow completion of the assessment. IRs can be issued starting at any point after an ANDA is acceptable for filing and throughout the assessment cycle. IRs can be a single discipline IR, meaning one letter from one of our subdisciplines, let's say drug product. Or it could be a multidiscipline IR, meaning one letter from more than one of our subdisciplines. For example, let's say drug product and biopharmaceutics both are ready to issue IR letters. Instead of issuing two separate IR letters, one from drug product and one from biopharmaceutics, the two can be combined into one IR letter containing questions from both. IRs can contain a requested response date and can be communicated by letter, email, or phone. Next, discipline review, or DR letters, represents preliminary findings by the discipline issued by the mid-cycle date. And because these are preliminary, a DR letter will usually reflect the input of the assessment team, but not input from all supervisory levels. Furthermore, if there are no deficiencies identified by the MCD, you will still get a letter. It'll be a no comments DR letter. And DR letters can also contain a requested response date. In summary, the purpose behind IR/DR letters is to increase communication during the assessment process and improve the agency's predictability and transparency. IR/DR letters, coupled with high-quality complete submissions, should minimize the number of assessment cycles and increase overall rate of approvals. So let's talk about some best practices. Responses to IR/DR letters need to be complete and submitted in a timely manner. So let's look at complete first. When submitting a response to the IR/DR letter, every deficiency and comment needs to have a complete response, and it cannot be a commitment to submit a response later. If there are 10 deficiencies, there should be 10 responses. This is considered a complete response. If there are only 8 responses, this is considered a partial response. Partial responses will not be accepted, and assessments for the IR/DR letter will not begin until a complete response to the IR/DR letter has been submitted. Now let's look at promptly. If an IR/DR letter response is submitted after the requested response date, it will be considered a late response, and late responses may impact the goal date. Additionally, if a complete response is ready to be issued, the late response could be deferred to the next assessment cycle. And lastly, only respond with requested information. Any gratuitous information may impact assessment time and goal dates. Next up, extension requests. If you cannot respond by the requested response date, request an extension as soon as possible by contacting the Regulatory Business Process Manager, your POC for all quality-related communications. The RBPM and the Quality Assessment Team will determine whether the extension can or cannot be granted. There are multiple things taken into consideration, such as the requested amount of time left on the assessment clock, as well as the assessment status of other disciplines. Responses and GDUFA goal date. Again, depending on the overall assessment status of the ANDA, if the IRDRL response is late, or there is gratuitous information submitted, or information that requires a more thorough assessment, this could potentially impact your goal date. Additionally, if the ANDA is otherwise ready for a complete response letter to be issued, the IRDRL response could be deferred to the next assessment cycle. And lastly, Drug Master File or DMF responses could also impact the ANDA assessment cycle. So it is important to communicate with your DMF holders to coordinate timing of submissions to not impact ANDA goal dates. 356H and cover letters. When submitting the 356H form, check to make sure all current facilities and responsibilities are clearly listed. For cover letters, make sure it clearly outlines all OPQ subdisciplines impacted by the submission. And last but not least, make sure your email is secure. If the email listed on the 356H is not secure, communications could be delayed. Requests for secure email can be sent to this email address here. All right, I think we're ready for another challenge question. Challenge question number 2. Which of the following statements is not true? A. Extension requests for quality IRDR letters will always be granted. B. Extension requests for quality IRDR letters should be requested as soon as possible. C. Extension requests for quality IRDR letters should be requested through the OPQ RBPM. Or D. Late responses to quality IRDRLs may impact the GDUFA goal date. The correct answer is A. The statement is not true. Extension requests for quality IRDRLs may not always be granted. There are many things that are taken into consideration. For example, the amount of requested time left on the assessment clock, as well as the assessment status of other disciplines. The final part of my presentation will be frequently asked questions. Number 1. What if we cannot respond to the IRDR letter within the requested response date? Notify the RBPM as soon as possible. If a response can be submitted with a short extension, an extension may be granted. If a response cannot be submitted within the assessment cycle, then it's good practice to let the RBPM know not to expect a response so assessments can be closed out. Number 2. Are multiple extensions allowed to respond to the IRDR letter? It is recommended when requesting an extension to request for sufficient time to completely respond to the IRDR letter instead of asking for multiple extensions. Number 3. Who should we contact if we have questions about a quality-related communication? The RBPM is your POC for all OPQ-related communications. For other ANDA-related questions, please reach out to the Regulatory Project Manager within the Office of Generic Drugs. Number 4, can we respond to some of the questions and provide a commitment for the remaining questions to be submitted at a later time? The answer is no. Commitments will not be accepted, as this would constitute a partial response. And again, this applies to both IR and DR letters. Here are two great resources, a guidance and a map about IR and DR letters. So I hope everyone is now familiar with the ANDA assessment timeline, as well as the various quality communication time points. Make sure to respond to all quality IR/DR letters completely and in a timely manner. Your POC for all quality-related communications is OPQ's RBPM. As with most things, communication is key, and IR/DR letters are utilized to communicate with industry during the assessment of an application. Additionally, IR/DR letters promote efficiency and effectiveness of the assessment process in an effort to increase overall rate of approvals, ultimately improving access to important quality generic drugs for the American public. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.